Nate, thanks so much for joining me again here on the Homeschool Sanity Show. I was hoping you could start off by letting us know what has been happening since we last talked with you and your family.
Yeah. Man, when did we talk? A year or two ago?
Yeah.
Uh, I'm trying to organize my life. So I live with a wife and two kids in Idaho. My kids are at a charter school near us that we really like. It's kind of got a good vibe as far as the academics go. Uh, and we have not done a lot of interesting stuff in the last 2 years. No, I take that back. We did a fun trip to Denmark. Um, my business partner, the nomadic professor, he was on last time. His name's Billy, but he's in Alaska right now, filming for a history of Alaska course. So, we've always got something going on, but otherwise I'm just here at a home base in Idaho. I'm in my office here.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, we actually got to connect in Alaska which was a lot of fun for me. I did not know that you were going to be there, or at least I wasn't thinking about it. So it was really great. And then I saw you again at Great Homeschool Conventions. That was in California, right?
Yeah, California, and Alaska. And yeah, it was nice to connect in those places. And I'm glad you understood my charm and you were happy to connect.
Yes, yes, I did. Absolutely. New courses that you have added to your catalog is a course on media literacy. I think
Okay.
media literacy is such an important topic, such an important class to teach to our high school students. But before we dive into that, let's talk about what media literacy is. How would you define that?
Um, so there are a lot of different takes. I mean, I think in a general sense, people understand what we're talking about when we say media literacy. Um, However, I've been around enough different approaches to feel like there are actually fundamental differences. Um, so media literacy can mean a kind of basic ability to navigate the internet safely. Safety is a big concern, obviously, of a lot of um, parents for their kids, for example. So safety is one focus that I've seen a lot. Um, my focus, I think, is maybe unique because I don't get to the sort of tips and tricks of how to navigate the internet until the very end of the course. That's our final unit. Leading up to that, I try to provide a really big picture kind of perspective on what we're doing. So we'll get into lots of different stuff from, how what does it look like and how reliable is it when we have an emotional response to a headline? Or what's the difference between looking at an article on your phone versus on a physical newspaper, or hearing a claim from a friend versus reading it on Facebook or the New York Times, or all of these different contexts really inform and change the nature of the information we are coming across. And a kind of literacy with all these different mediums is, I think, important. Now, on top of that, there's like a historical perspective to the media that can help kind of ground it and provide perspective and context. So we go all the way back to, um, well, we go a long ways back, but I'll just start, let's say, 1980s, 1990s, and a 24-hour news cycle. Like, you may not immediately conceive of that as the most relevant subject, talking about um, media literacy in 2024, but being able to recognize, hey, we came from a place and there were these innovations, say newspapers to radio to broadcast TV to needing to fill 24 hours worth of media content to, the internet and social media. Like having a perspective on all of these innovations and developments kind of helps you look at our current media environment with a bit more perspective, a bit more understanding, a bit less kind of feeling of being in the dark. So anyway, that's a long way of answering the question, but there are a lot of different approaches to media literacy, and a lot of what I see is either outdated or kind of really just takes the surface level. Um, and I think there are approaches that get below the surface that provide more perspective than just, what do I do when I open Google? I think we're starting too late if that's our approach.
Okay. And I imagine that um, it's also going to take a look at, how do you determine a source's reliability, a source's bias and perspective. How do you determine what is true? I mean, are you going to take a look at all of those aspects of media literacy also?
Yeah, um, that is a big part of what we do. And the major takeaway is if I say it, it's true. If it comes from the nomadic professor, you can believe it because we have no interest in this question. We have no bias. Um, yeah. So I think so. I did this little 2-minute tip a while ago in one of our lessons on outdated criteria for judging source reliability. You can still go to university websites and find acronyms that they use. I forget what all of them are called. One of them I think is CRAAP, the CRAP method, and it is appropriately named because it's not updated for the internet.
Hmm.
So their
Hmm.
criteria is stuff like look at the URL or the top level domain. Is it .com or .net? Does it have an about page? Are there typos? Does it, this kind of stuff that is unbelievably easy to get around
Hmm.
now that, you can put up a Wix or WordPress site in an hour without being a professional. And then, ChatGPT can write your copy and Grammarly can make sure it sounds good. Like none of this stuff, even the .com, .net, .edu, these are all outdated criteria. So you go to university websites and uh, either nobody is explicitly paying attention to this subject or their understanding of how to teach the subject is just very outdated. So it's not surprising that adolescents and college students are very vulnerable, very susceptible to being misled, to having their emotions and biases manipulated, to reasoning based on who their tribes and teams are because they don't have a profound understanding of a given issue. So we go into that stuff like significantly. And this is one place where there might be a connection point between, you know, our company, the Nomadic Professor. We teach high school history. Like that's my subject area. That's my business partner's subject area. He teaches at the college level. I teach at the high school level. It's a very good combination of like support and scaffolding, but also rigor. But it overlaps with this question of literacy because this because a historian has to practice a certain set of skills for getting to the bottom of any claim. You know, what started whatever historical event, the Civil War, or was the American Revolution justified, or should the United States have, joined World War One or World War whatever? These big sort of why questions that don't have concrete answers. History is about more than just knowing names and dates. Historians have to be adept at making arguments and comparing claims and interpreting evidence. So if you take that set of skills and you transfer it to reading on the internet, this addresses your question like pretty precisely. They have to source, where did it come from? Who said it? What are the institutional biases? And then they have to contextualize when, is it from? What is the context surrounding that might influence the way I interpret and read it? Was it public or was it private? Was it written? Was it spoken? What else was going on at the time? These are the kinds of questions historians have to ask when they're trying to make a claim about the past. This is the kind of area of history that is fun because it's about more than just remembering stuff. That's like the most, well, it's a critical part of being historically literate, but it's not the end. And history gets a bad rap because it's like, why do I have to memorize a bunch of stuff I'm never going to use again? This is where it gets kind of fun. Source, contextualize, then you have to know language. You're smiling because it might be fun only for nerds, but even for students, this is where the rubber hits the road a little bit when they can say, you're wrong about that. Or they can engage with their peers in a debate where they feel really empowered by being able to interpret something in an original way. So they've got to understand, how do I read between the lines? How do I make sense of the word choices of this or that historian? Or, if you're transferring that to the internet, this or that media outlet, this or that partisan source. And then they're not even done then. They've sourced and contextualized. They've read really closely. They still can't make a judgment until they have corroborated. Now they've got to read a bunch of different sources and kind of get a sense for the lay of the land. Where does that source lie? What are the competing arguments? What other evidence exists? How do I respond to potentially contradictory claims? All of this stuff. So we address this question of, which sources are reliable from a really secure and time-tested place of, this is the methodology that you use to make sense of claims in lots of different contexts. And we update that and sort of adapt it to the internet in ways that make it not just an academic exercise for historians getting a PhD. But anyway, that's kind of the core of the answer is these two disciplines of media literacy and historical literacy really, I think, combine well to prepare students to take in information regardless of the context.
Right. Okay, so make your case for why homeschooling parents who are listening to you should reserve time in their high schoolers or their eighth graders curriculum plan for media literacy. Why is it so important for our high schoolers to learn these skills and gain this knowledge?
Because I really want your money, and so I want you to buy my course.
Sure.
So, I mean, part of my answer is just going to be repetitive because, well, actually, I should clarify. Our approach is best suited for high school students. We are targeting sort of ninth grade to 12th grade. A student younger than that would require a good amount of support. For example, our first unit gets into sort of psychological principles and philosophical principles and development of technology in ways that are a little bit more abstract. And then we get into history and we talk about the development of these technologies and the dissemination of information and all of that. And so it kind of starts in a place and develops at a level that is probably most age appropriate for high school students who's, you know, they are comfortable reading, they're comfortable thinking outside the box, they're comfortable with abstraction. That said, I recommend for a lot of families that they do this with their students. So parents and students doing it together. So in that, if it's in that context, younger students could take part because it's like a family discussion versus an academic exercise. So now the case for media literacy, I think the case gets made for me pretty uh, robustly if you spend any time online. And you don't even have to be online. Just listen to the things your kids bring home from, you know, their friends' houses or school if they're in a, you know, lots of families will do hybrid and so they have this mix of environments where their kids are being educated in different contexts. You can listen to those conversations. You can get on social media. You can look at the tenor of the level of sophistication of the what goes on, you know, Twitter. All of this kind of, you can just look at our politics and the level of partisanship, and it's not, we are not engaging with questions in a way that suggests a kind of serious good faith effort to take ourselves seriously, but to take other people seriously as well. Part of that may stem from ignorance and fear, and part of it, you know, stems from I don't know what else, just the context we're in. Uh, but the tendency to sort of fall back on this is my side, this is my team, my tribe. It's a very comfortable place to be, you
Mm.
know, for students and adults alike. I don't know a lot
Mm.
about this, but my friend does, or these are the politics I've heard my parents talk about, or this is kind of the safe place to be because there's a majority consensus here, you know, at my university or whatever. So we fall back on these tendencies that exploit our psychological vulnerabilities for just being loyal to our groups. And I think that leads us to be polarized.
Mm.
And obviously, our primary polarization in American politics is around, you know, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or, you know, Trump or Biden or whatever the context is. You can update it for any election cycle. But the case for media literacy is both because we are hyper partisan and hyper political in our online discourse, our willingness to engage with others in a good faith way, our willingness to befriend people whose politics and values are not the same as ours, or even vehemently disagree with ours. That shouldn't necessarily have this real world impact of I can't even live next door to you. I think that leads to a social climate that is just unlivable.
Mhm.
Um,
You know, Nate, you actually gave me an insight right there that, as a psychologist, I think I should have had, and I did not. And that is, as the events in our lives, and I would say that this is true worldwide, have become more anxiety provoking, more fearful. Of course, we are becoming more tribal, as a way of feeling safe. So,
mhm.
and before, I guess I was just thinking that it was out of, the limited scope of information that people are taking in. We know that people, regardless of which side of an issue you're on, we tend to be in echo chambers these days. You know, like we know that from social media, right? That the more you watch, for example, the more you read of things that reinforce your perspective, the more of that perspective that social media platform will serve up to you. So it's just
Hmm.
reinforcing what you already believe. And that was really where I was going instead of thinking about, oh, this is what people are doing to try to reassure themselves in a frightening situation. And I wanted to say that, but I also wanted to say that the situation, even for someone like me, who my background is very much in research as a psychologist. I've said this on this podcast before that the primary education that I received in graduate school was not here's how you treat all of these mental disorders, but it was here is how you do research. I didn't really enjoy that, to
Hmm.
be honest. But I know how to do research, and I find it incredibly time consuming and challenging to get to. I won't even use the word truth because it's just so, you know, so laden
Yeah.
with extra meaning. But how about this? How about accurate information? I it's a struggle. It's a struggle for someone like me, and I
Hmm.
know how to look for it, and it is
Yeah.
so crazy time consuming. So, do you help high school
Yeah.
students with that issue?
Yes. So can I respond to a couple of things and then circle back to this issue of time consuming research? Um, because you responded to and uh, your response raised other things that I think are important just to wrap up. Um, the first one is confirmation bias, echo chambers, and filter bubbles. I think they're very real. This was not going to be news to anybody in your audience, probably because this comes up all the time. There may be a tendency to think everybody else is in an echo chamber, but I'm not. And I think you got to be careful. You got to be careful of that psychological tendency to trust that the things you know are only true about others and not yourself. Um, so confirmation biases are real. They are the result of, you know, incentives built into our economic system, the ad economy. They're the result of development of our technologies, the way social media platforms have been built and reacted to the existing incentives and all of that. And they're a result of our own innate psychological vulnerabilities. We just like to be patted on the back. We don't like to be told we're wrong. So this leads me to the other thing I wanted to follow up on. This is gonna sound very pretentious. So just know that I am justified in being pretentious because I'm a genius. Um, there is actually a bit of that was a joke. Melody didn't laugh, but for those of you listening, uh,
Okay, okay.
there you go. There's the cue. There's the cue. Now your audience knows. Um, there is a bit of moral education built into uh, the what's the word? The need to be literate because being literate
Mm,
is about, like I said at the beginning, it's about more than tips and tricks. It's also about, you know, epistemological humility. Am I willing to doubt myself, to be skeptical about what I do and don't know? Am I willing to say I don't know? Am I willing to say you could be right? Am I willing to change
mm,
my opinion? Epistemic humility it's a value, not just a skill. And being willing to value uh, learning as opposed to just clinging to the things that we already feel strongly about, I think is important. And so this involves a bit of coming at the internet not with, you know, fangs bared and I have to hold on to what is mine or I'm going to lose my identity. there's also a bit of this that is like, let's come at the world, not to suggest everybody needs to be informed about what's happening second to second, but just in our engagement with what's going on in the world, there's a lot to be said for being willing to say, I don't know, or I don't have an opinion about that, or your answer is
That's
actually better than mine.
that's
Like,
crazy. You don't have an
you know,
opinion.
there is so much pressure to just have an
Hmm.
opinion. What do you think about immigration? What do you think
Hmm.
about, whether it's a political issue or an economic issue or something related to education or uh, uh, any other topic that um, could come up in some public forum. It's like there's just an immense amount of pressure to have a position.
Hmm.
So just to touch on you also mentioned that you were trained in research at a graduate level. So you know how to do these things like source and contextualize and compare and corroborate. There is something to understanding that the internet is such a new medium that we can't read it the same way we read books. In books, you read sort of up and down within the source itself because there used to be guardrails for what got published. And so you felt more assured that once it reaches you, somebody else has already vetted it, whether it's a press or publisher or peer reviewers or, whatever it was. But those guardrails are all gone. So our understanding for how to do research in a brick and mortar library is not irrelevant, but it does have to be updated for how to do research online because those guardrails are not there anymore. So how do you do research in a space where nothing has been vetted before it reaches your eyes, whether it's on social media or even on a website that looks like it's totally professional? It
Hmm.
hasn't been vetted.
Hmm.
Um, so this gets to the question of how do you do research online in a way that is not massively time consuming and just hugely draining. I mean, you get to the point where you just want to say, I just don't care. I'm not going to believe anything because I don't have time to know anything.
And
Um,
and
Go ahead.
honestly, I'm just going to interject exactly. I'm not going to believe anything. And observing people in my social circles, and I have people from many different perspectives in my personal life. Um, I have found not only that idea that I'm just not going to believe anything, but also believing the most fantastic,
Yes.
outrageous things. And it really, really concerns me because, of course, um, it's a bit, not a bit, but it's actually a lot like the boy who cried wolf.
Hmm.
And when we really need people to pay attention to factual information that can protect them, possibly even save their lives, are they going to listen? Or are they going to say, oh, that's not true? It's just not true.
Yeah, that's um, just so on point. I got an email from a user yesterday. It was going to sound like I'm making it up just to segue, but I'm not. I got an email from a user yesterday. Her question was, does your media literacy course uh, train students to merely, well, the point of the question was, are students coming out of your course going to be cynical because now they just think that nothing can be trusted? And I think that's the gist of what we're touching on here is, okay, we are developing filters, we are identifying criteria for making judgments about what sources can and can't be trusted. If the end result of this process is nothing can be trusted and a kind of lazy uh, cynicism, then we've done a really poor job of teaching the subject. But that is the sort of natural, I think, I mean, speaking anecdotally, natural response to just absolute fatigue. And we've been through years now of, you know, once trusted institutions having egg on their face because they either, you know, outright lied, or how they represented something wasn't all the way true, and there's a mix of bad motives and incompetence and all of that in there, but the end result is, man, they screwed up here, so I don't trust them now at all. And that is a response that I think is more and more common. So the question is, how do you, tell me if I've veered from the topic here, but how do you uh, get into an understanding of the media without ending in a place where you are either your own authority on every subject, or nobody's honest and nothing matters because everyone's a liar, or I don't trust institutions, therefore every wacky theory I hear is true, right? Like these are all, it's like just um, bouncing between extremes without being grounded in anything that allows you to sort of be more discerning than that.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so I think the short answer is there you can be literate with the media in a way that avoids those extremes. Um, there's a there's still an open question about how informed does any individual person need to be. I don't spend 2 hours a day reading the headlines. You know, when my people in my circle say, "What do you think about this or that?" Sometimes I say, "I don't know." You know, it's just it hasn't made it to the top of my priority list yet. I don't know. I don't have to be informed about everything that happens. So that's an open question, and people should decide, am I trying to take in too much? Do I have to be an expert in everything as it happens up to the second? Obviously, the answer is no. To the extent that you decide it's important for me to know about X, Y, or Z, there are there are ways to get informed that avoid cynicism, that build confidence, and that don't take forever to develop.
Right.
One side note before I touch on that, and I don't know if if I should stop talking and let you ask a follow up question, but some of this pressure for having opinions is a result of a historical development that, if you understand, this is what I'm talking about, sort of relieves the pressure valve to uh, know things and have a side to take. Like some of this comes from as recently as the 80s and 90s with the advent of 24-hour news with CNN. You know, when you start to live in a paradigm where the news is constant, it's 24/7, you have to fill up that time with something. So you just talk about whatever you can to fill up that time. And it kind of contributes to an environment where it feels like news is uh, paramount. It is
Hmm.
the end all. It is no longer just a thing that you sort of update yourself with the morning paper or the evening, you know, summary or whatever. It is now a thing that consumes more attention than anything else. And the question is whether that's justified or whether it's a result of a historical development that could have developed differently. It's a sort of
Hmm.
contingent moment where the technology, the culture, the politics all came together to say, this is now how we conceive of news as this pressure filled 24/7 thing. And if you're not up to the date, you're ignorant. Um, so I think some of our current environment is just a result of this historical development. And when you say, actually, I think I'd rather take a 1940s approach to news and just It's okay to turn off sometimes. I don't need to know it all. Um, I think that can be healthy and it can be confidence building.
Mhm.
So that's part of the reason for having a history unit in our media literacy course is to kind of contextualize all this. How did we get here? And is this the only paradigm to exist within when we're talking about public information? Um, we still haven't gotten to how to do this quickly, but I'll pause and just give you one second to have get a word in.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the 1 second. Um, as you are talking, Nate, I'm realizing what an amazing topic of conversation to have with your kids. I can absolutely see parents doing this along with their kids. And I think you said that that is often the case when we started this conversation. Um, I just think it could be so, so interesting. And when I start to get myself all worked up about news, events, and opinions, I have to stop and think how many times have politicians, lawmakers called to ask me what I think before they draft a law or vote. And
Yeah.
I can't really think of any.
Yeah, so there is that sort of unwritten pressure of not now, obviously this is a place where you have to walk the line between cynicism and neurosis because somewhere in the middle
Right.
there is I am informed because it is maybe you conceive of it as a civic obligation, maybe it's
Mhm.
just personally fulfilling, maybe there are different reasons, but there's you got to walk the line between I'm neurotically obsessed with the headlines and I am cynical because nobody can be trusted. So there's some middle
Mhm.
ground there.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that this having these conversations between parents and kids, um, or teachers and kids, whatever the students, whatever the context is valuable because one, some of this stuff is sophisticated, and some of these students who are getting into this subject aren't paying attention to the news anyway, so it might feel disconnected from the way they're living their lives. That's just a certain population, not everybody. So it,
Mhm.
it would be helpful for to have a kind of um, adult guide there to say, here's my experience. Let's look at these examples. This is where it will come up. You're about to go to college, all this kind of stuff. But also, I have a point of view, I have a bias, I have a certain set of methods that I rely on, and I try to train the kids to be very, uh, deliberate and intentional about the ways they come at information they hear. But it could be that a given parent or instructor has a new insight or a different perspective, or they want to unpack it based on some nuance that I didn't touch on. So they'll have their own things to add, or even say he's wrong about that. Let's talk about it in this way, and that's fine. I
Mhm.
the we're not so precious about the approach that we can't be contradicted, and I think it's important um, for people who are raising younger people to do so uh, with media literacy in mind.
Mhm.
Not now. Sorry, one more thing. Part of the reason for it is because adults are all often just as ignorant as their children. I don't say that even in jest.
Mhm.
None of us
Mhm.
grew up with the internet. I'm 38. I got the internet like wireless or Wi-Fi, whatever, in my 20s. I had dial-up as a teenager, but like none of us grew up knowing how to read online. So parents taking this with their kids is also like I've got to be educated too because I don't know how to do this stuff. The internet's
Mhm.
just as fraught and frightening and confusing to me as it is to my 15-year-old. Let's take the course together And I think together they'd get a lot out of it.
I do agree with that. Um, and I am hoping now, because I think we have probably intrigued people at the very least about your particular media literacy course. Can you tell us what people can expect? How is the course set up? What are some of the modules that you will be going over and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So the sort of, you know, on the ground level talk about this. It's for high school students. It's built as a half credit language arts elective course, though there may be other places you could find in the transcript to put it. Um, it's about 16 weeks if you do 2 sessions a week, but it would not be hard to make it longer than that because one, some of the concepts may take more time to internalize, and two, there are so many options for practice exercises that you really could spend a lot of extra time on any given topic that feels more, pertinent to your group. Um, and there are 5 units in the course. The first is fundamentals. That's where we, if you think of getting to the headlines as your end goal, we start here with what are the incentives built into the way websites are built? What are our psychological vulnerabilities that cause us to react emotionally to this or that? Um, how does the medium, meaning it's written, it's spoken, it comes through a screen, it's auditory, how does the medium impact the way we interpret? So we're down here at the fundamentals level. Then we get into history, providing the context I've tried to articulate throughout this conversation. Third one is politics. This is where we just, our goal in the politics unit is to familiarize students who are not familiar with terminology and concepts that come up, incessantly. Left, right, progressive, conservative, liberal, Democrat, Republican, these concepts that a lot of conversations sort of start by assuming you have that background knowledge. We're not assuming you have that background knowledge in this course. We're going to build it with you from the ground up. We've built this course in collaboration with a company called Ground News, ground.news. And what they do is present in one place, you can see how outlets in different places on the political spectrum are covering the same story. So, the assassination attempt on Donald Trump, you type that in, you pull up the story. Let's say it's been covered by 65 outlets. You can choose, organized by left-leaning outlets in the center, outlets on the right. That's an enlightening exercise all by itself, because you can see the right is framing it this way, and it sounds like, totally different than the way the left is framing it. Maybe, pick your event and see how the political spectrum is covering it. That's an enlightening exercise all by itself. So,
Mm-hmm.
but a site like Ground News or different sites that try to rate outlets based on their political bias are not very useful if you don't speak that language and you don't have the historical context to understand what are the stereotypes they're working off of.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like the end all. That's not the end of the conversation. Ground News says it's a left-leaning source, therefore it is. But it is a really useful shortcut for starting the conversation. So that's our third unit,
Mm-hmm.
politics. Our fourth unit is on language. So this will be familiar to language arts students and teachers. Word choice, tone, framing, political speak, biases, vested interest. How do you read between the lines? What's an inference? All this stuff is our language unit, because now we're getting close to, we have the background. how do we get into the source? And then our final unit is tools. So this is where we get into stuff like uh, now we're really ready to be on the internet, or to engage with information in the 21st century. Lateral reading, um, going back to the original source, maybe reverse image searching, uh, tips and tricks that will help you be on the internet in a smart way today. It's not just a conceptual thing that provides framework, it's a practical tip you can employ. So that's our final unit that we call tools.
Well, that really, really sounds amazing. I would actually love to take the course. So I might have to add that to my list of summer activities. Because can I take it? Is it on demand, Nate, or is it something that you are teaching
Uh,
live?
so we have different options. You can just do our self-graded option, which means you can either subscribe to the courses and you get access for as long as you choose, or you can purchase the course and own it forever. And in either of those cases, you get access to the content, access to the handouts, access to the videos, access to the exercises, and you can just do them at your own pace. We provide answer keys, we provide model answers, and we provide video guidance. If you would like an instructor, we do teach a live version of the course through a partner institution called AIM Academy Online. So that'll be, we have a section this fall and we have a section starting in January. So just a 1 semester half credit elective course, but both options are available.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I will put links, of course, to your course information in the show notes. But before we wrap up, I would love to have you tell us what other courses you have available through the Nomadic Professor.
Awesome. Thank you. Uh, so we are, like I said, at one point, we're a history company, and so in some ways it's uh, quirky to have a media literacy course, but hopefully I articulated why it overlaps so well with history instruction. The other courses we have currently available, we have a 4-part American history program. Um, each of those parts is a semester, so if you did the full thing, it would be 2 years, but it is integrated with language arts subjects. So you'd also get credit in rhetoric and logic, American literature, historical methods, composition. All this stuff is built in, which is part of the reason it takes 2 years. In addition, I haven't actually addressed why it's called the Nomadic Professor. Our courses include on location videos of the historical events where they happened. So whether you're talking about the American Revolution or World War II, uh, my business partner is all over the world. That's why he's in Alaska right now, because our History of Alaska course is coming out in September, and he's all over the state filming really engaging on location content for the course. So there's that 4-part American history course. Also develops skills for literacy, I should say. We do document lessons where our focus is historical literacy, but that skill translates into other contexts. And then we have a course on the history of free speech, which actually anybody can take for free. That course was purchased from us by a group called FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. So you'll find it on our site, but then it'll take you to create a free account because they host the course now. And then our world courses will start in January. So we will roll out on a drip schedule World 1 in 2025 and then World 2 toward the end of 2025. We have a bunch of other electives on the way, but that's kind of our immediate slate of courses.
Well, those sound really, really fascinating. I think I'm going to be busy doing your courses myself. So if I'm delayed getting
Ooh,
my own curriculum out, it will be your fault.
well, I'm happy to hear that. And everybody, you heard it here. Your host has been persuaded. So I think that means you all have to fall in line.
That's right. Well, Nate, it is always a pleasure to visit with you, and I hope I will end up seeing you at a conference or two this coming year. But If I don't, I just wish you so well. And if you would just give us a shout out of your website, URL, and your social media before we say goodbye.
Yeah, the two places to go are just nomadicprofessor.com, not it's just nomadicprofessor.com. And then our Instagram is Nomadic Professor Courses. So the Nomadic Professor has his own personal Instagram channel. You can check that out. And then our Instagram business channel is Nomadic Professor Courses. And then check us out on YouTube or check out the Nomadic Professor on YouTube. Lots of free content there. Just search the Nomadic Professor and it'll be one of the first to pop up. Dozens of videos filmed all over the world that'll give you a taste of how we approach the subject in our history courses.
Well, that is wonderful. Thanks so much. This was honestly very enlightening and even personally helpful for me. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Melanie. It was great to chat.